The reveal of the world of Mu during the God Valley flashback recontextualizes some important aspects of the story. For example, when Van Auga said to Saturn that Blackbeard wants the world, or the name of the world government itself. So what is the world of Mu? Is it a dream conjured up by Emu when Emu was a child, perhaps? In chapter 1163 of the One Piece manga, our major villain finally revealed what he or she wants. Emu has a vision of a perfect world, called the World of Mu. It seems that Emu is worried that the spirit of Davy Jones poses a threat to the current hold Emu has over the world. But why? We've seen Emu have a similar reaction to Joy Boy's life force when Emeth unleashed a strong Haki blast planted within him by Joy Boy long ago. So what's with the connection between Emu, Davy and Joy Boy? Now, please subscribe and like the video and we'll get straight into unpacking another One Piece mystery. First, we can look back in the story at other arcs to get a better understanding of what elements make up the world of Mu. Emu wanting to make a perfect world is foreshadowed by characters such as Wapol, Enel, Sugar, Doflamingo, Arlong and Road, each of which are villains of their own respective subplot. Enel is a strong parallel for Emu, invading the Sky Islands and reforming the area into his own, using fear. Additionally, an ancient energy source played a role in Enel's B-plot, suggesting Emu is connected to ancient energy and ruling by fear. In Road's case, he made his own perfect world in an enclosure, where he role-played as the sun god, and used the enclosure's inhabitants as toys. This implies a facet of the world of Mu is pretending to be the sun god, and using the world's inhabitants as subjects of said sun god. Sugar parallels Emu also, and in her version of a perfect world, she remained a child despite being 22, and her subjects were children's toys that no one could remember. So the reader can presume Emu's perfect world involves the arrested development of a child, as well as some sort of great forgetting. So of course, Emu looks quite small. It could be that Emu is a child himself. Now we see toys again in Wapol's cover story as well. It shows us Wapol living under a bridge among junk and eventually using this junk to make toys, and then selling the toys to get himself out of poverty. This tells us that Emu came from a rough background and that his current perspectives are established from this upbringing. Furthermore, Luffy, Sabo and Ace grew up in the junkyard of Grey Terminal, suggesting their circumstances during their younger years somewhat mirror Emu's. In other words, Emu and Luffy both grew up treated as trash and both inherited different perspectives from this upbringing. Later in his life, after Wapol fled Drum Island, he created a new kingdom, which was his own version of Drum, called Black Drum Kingdom, echoing the idea of a perfect world. We see this reinforced by Arlong, who inherited the suffering of his captain, Fisher Tiger, and his hate for humans. He then perpetuated this suffering by building Arlong Park and taxing the local people. This is a parallel of Marie Joie and the Heavenly Tribute. Complete control is also an aspect of the world of Mu, reflected by Doflamingo, who did something similar with his birdcage. Meanwhile, Crocodile's plan was literally named Operation Utopia, another word for a perfect world, and he also made a location with the epithet City of Dreams. So, Emu's perfect world is a world of Emu's dreams in some form. And again, to bring up Wapol, Wapol is actually the true heir to the throne of Drum Kingdom, as his father was the previous king, so we can infer that Emu was a successor to the Ancient Kingdom, but instead remade the Ancient Kingdom in his own image, which is likely Marie Joie and the New World, hinted at in the name, New World. If this is true, then that would fit with the notion that the world was flipped, and would make one half of the world of Mu, aka Emu's perfect world. This means that the other half of the world is not the world of Mu, but instead the world of something else. Considering we're talking about the right side of the blue planet, we can see this makes a clear D shape. The D moniker is associated with Joy Boy and Davy Jones, of course, meaning that this half of the world that has paradise in is the world of Joy Boy and Davy. This tracks because this hemisphere is full of different races, exotic technology, mythical lands and abilities and crazy weather. And again, its name, Paradise, alludes to it being a perfect world of sorts, particularly biblically. So to summarize, we're saying that the left hemisphere of the blue planet, so the half containing the new world, could be Emu's world of Mu, whereas the right hemisphere with Paradise is the world of D. Seeing as the world was said to be flipped, we can infer that prior to 900 years ago, it was the other way round. So Emu and the Ancient Kingdom were on the right side of the planet originally, and Davy was on the left side of the planet originally. Similar ideas have been covered before in other media. For example, in Game of Thrones, there's a large wall that divides the two types of worlds, the North and the South, much like the Red Line does. This tells us the Red Line may have been erected to split the two worlds apart. If this is the case, it must have happened before Emu's rule at Marijois, hinting that it may have even been Davy who erected the Red Line to stop Emu from creating the world of Mu across the entire globe as opposed to half of it. The word Mu might evoke the hero of Mamudin, a character Robin told us occurred during the Age of Heavens, centuries before the Void Century. So it's possible Emu was around at this time. We can assume this transfer to the other half of the world occurred during the Void Century because Marijois was established at the beginning of the Void Century. The next 100 years is forgotten to the world, potentially in an effort to cover up Emu's connection to the Ancient Kingdom and Emu's origins. Not remembering the true history is partly what we mean when we say the world of Mu is a fantasy or a dream. The world of Mu, first and foremost, is a physical manifestation of Emu's dream. This is foreshadowed by the kingdoms under the world government meeting every year at a reverie, which is a term synonymous with daydreaming. Blackbeard doesn't dream, so he wants to destroy Emu's dream world. Luffy, on the other hand, wants to liberate people from this dream world by imposing his own dream. If Luffy destroys Marijois, this would return the capital of the Ancient Kingdom back to the other side of the world, which is Reverse Mountain, where we've speculated Laugh-Tale is located. This might suggest that Laugh-Tale was once located in the New World, similar to how Marijois was probably originally in Paradise. So again embodying this whole idea that the world was flipped. Since the Egghead arc, readers were introduced to the Abyss. The Abyss encapsulated a hellish vibe, and there's a couple quotes that refer to Marijois as hell. Naturally, hell sits beneath the living world, but Marijois is at the top of the world, embodied by a quote from Sabo when he saw Emu in the throne room. So it seems that the world has also been flipped vertically as well as horizontally. This tells us something else about the world of Mu. That Emu's world is hell on Earth, or as we might say in the One Piece world, the Abyss on Earth. If this is true, then it means whatever the world government labels as demonic or devilish are likely the opposite and instead come from the heavens or were divine before the world was flipped. So we're talking about devil fruits, curses such as Vanderdecken the First, demons, which Joy Boy is often tied to, and sea devils, which Davy is tied to. So Emu's world is a complete distortion of reality, where the world is twisted or flipped, as depicted by Enel, who's a villain in the heavens right at the top of the world, a false god. With Emu and the Abyss being at the top, we can wonder if this means Davy Jones' locker, usually found at the bottom of the ocean, is supposed to actually be located at the top of the world. As a side note, we see two streams in the One Piece world that send people to these locations, with the knock-up stream sending the Straw Hats into the sky, and the downward plume sending the Straw Hats down into the depths of the ocean. Okay, but when did all this take place? We already said it most likely was prior to the Void Century, and we also mentioned the hero of Mamudin from the Age of Heavens. Fans of the channel would have heard me talk ad nauseum about the connection between Mamudin and Emu, and I've given a rough time frame as to when I think this all happened, as well as how it all lines up with the Age of Heavens. Now, that said, at the same time Oda reveals the world of Mu in chapter 1164, he also drops an SBS confirming exactly when the Age of Heavens took place. This probably isn't a coincidence, and now we can re-examine the timeline and align the specific dates, which should tell us when Emu was first around roughly, and perhaps Davy as well. So Oda reveals that the current year that we're in the story, that we call 1541 of the Age of the Sea Circle, is also the year 4141 Age of Heavens. So the Age of Heavens definitely was an age prior to the one we see in the current story. The gap between them is 2,600 years. So during the year 2600 Age of Heavens, something happened that created a new and separate timeline. Interestingly, we have a gap of just under 2,600 years without any recorded history at this exact point in the timeline too. However, I'm not sure if that's just coincidence or if Oda intended it, to be honest. So one idea here is it could have been during this 2,600 year gap that the ancient kingdom was formed, or the Red Line was erected, or potentially both. Either of these events likely embodies a time of great division, so there definitely could have been conflict involving Emu around this time period. Okay, yeah, and this leads us to another element of the perfect world of Mu, which is immortality. The villain of Thriller Bark, Moria, resurrected the dead, among whom were a few Rocks pirates. We also read about Hogback and the undead Victoria. So Thriller Bark connects immortality to a relationship with a woman, evoking Emu's relationship with Lily and telling us the Nefertari Queen was required for Emu to live unnaturally long. Cobra told us there's been 12 rulers of Alabasta in 800 years, and the effects of Amber-Led syndrome could suggest Emu's immortality fades with each passing generation. So in other words, every time a ruler passes, Emu gets a little bit weaker. This would explain why Emu wants Vivi now, which is to perpetuate the world of Mu for another 8 centuries. Immortality in One Piece ties to the perpetual youth surgery, and Emu parallels Sugar also, who's perpetually young. Kureha has a secret of youth, and there's a focus on the imaginations of children in the story, such as with Bonnie. So despite the fact Emu is immortal, it's likely she's perpetually young, and could still be a child as we mentioned earlier, which would explain the small demeanour Emu has. We see this scaled with a wanted poster during chapter 906. If this is the case, then it would mean Emu's dream of a perfect world is a childish dream. What we mean by this is that Emu's dream of the world of Mu is idealistic and comes from Emu's childhood. As such, it's likely unrealistic, which we see manifested by the world's nations suffering under the world government's rule. So in summary, because Emu was unhappy as a child, Emu now projects that unhappiness onto the rest of the world. But if Luffy becomes king of the pirates, he'll likely project his joy across the world, freeing people from this. So why is Emu flipping the world and making things all twisted? First, we take a look at the lost continent of Mu from the myths of our own world. The legend of Mu first appeared in the early 20th century through the writings of James Churchward, who described it as an immense, advanced civilization that once thrived in the Pacific Ocean before being swallowed by cataclysmic floods. The survivors of Mu, he claimed, spread their knowledge across the world, becoming the ancestors of later great civilizations. Central to the myth was the idea of a motherland of humanity, a place of enlightenment and unity that fell due to hubris and the misuse of sacred power. So, as always, we're seeing the whole Promethean flame motif. Mu thus came to symbolize both the height of human potential and the tragedy of its own erasure. Oda's story appears to reimagine the whole myth within its own narrative of a lost age, which would be the Void Century and the surviving shadow it leaves, which is the world government. The name Emu itself mirrors Mu phonetically and conceptually. In Japanese, the syllable for Emu is the reversed form of Mu, hinting at some inversion and concealment. Emu sits upon the empty throne, the supposed symbol of equality among nations, yet secretly rules over all. In this reversal, Oda transforms Mu's radiant civilization into its opposite, a hidden monarch who suppresses the memory of the true sun god. Thematically, both Mu and Emu are bound to cycles of creation, destruction, and amnesia. Mu's downfall, through the misuse of divine power, mirrors Emu's ability to erase entire kingdoms, such as Lalesia, reflecting the age-old act of submerging a world beneath the sea. The survivors of Mu, in Churchward's story, scatter fragments of their knowledge across time. Likewise, the survivors of the Great Kingdom in One Piece inscribe the poneglyphs to preserve forbidden truths. The Will of D may therefore represent the spiritual continuation of Mu, a lineage of those who remember what the world was meant to be before it was written. On a symbolic level, the lost land of Mu was often described as a land of the sun, ruled by solar kings. Oda's mythology also revolves around the sun, embodied in Nika, the sun god, whose freedom stands in direct opposition to Emu's modus operandi. If Mu was the civilization of the sun, then Emu may be the ruler who extinguished the sun, the one who turned enlightenment into suppression. In this sense, Emu is the inversion of Mu, the guardian, not of knowledge but of forgetting. Through this mirror, Oda could be suggesting that history repeats itself through inversions, that every lost civilization leaves behind both its light and a shadow. Emu's reign over a world built on amnesia completes the mythic cycle that began with Mu's fall, or in this case the ancient kingdom's fall. What was once drowned has been resurrected in distorted form, and the dawn sought by the will of D may be the return to a balance that was previously lost to the ocean. So the premise of the world of Mu has been portrayed in countless media before. Emu wants to remove the human element from the grand equation, because Emu thinks that humans will inevitably destroy themselves over and over again. This will be because of Emu's own experience at the hands of humanity. So Emu represents control, the holding on to tradition, whereas Luffy does not care and his nature alone unsettles the establishment. In the One Piece world, this is a good thing because the world government's control causes great suffering. We see this manifested in the Wapol cover page we mentioned, with Wapol being surrounded by trash. Wapol, aka the people living in the world government's conditions, lives in trash, aka the environment created by the world government, and subsequently he makes a livelihood out of this trash. This raises his standing in the world, which unbalances the world equilibrium, and then Emu is forced to set out and flatten that nail that's now sticking up, if you get what I mean. So what we're saying is that Emu's rule creates harsh and polluted conditions, and then people make do and improvise and adapt to their environment, and eventually some of these people rise out of their situation. But then that leaves Emu to then put them back down. So we saw this with Ohara, right, and Clover. Clover nearly said the name of the ancient kingdom, and because of it, the whole of Ohara was gotten rid of. Now, in the world of One Piece, every great power seems to be connected to a dream. Roger's was to discover the truth, Luffy's was to live freely, and Emu's perhaps is to perfect the world itself. If we strip away the layers of mystery surrounding Emu, pieces suggest our antagonist is not a simple tyrant clinging to power, but an ideologue, someone who has seen the chaos of the ancient world and concluded that humanity must be controlled in order to survive. This is embodied by Emu's Pangaea Castle and Marijois. Marijois itself is not a natural feature of the Red Line, but instead built on top of it. The celestial dragons wear helmets and have runny noses without them, indicating humans are weakened by living in the controlled conditions Emu keeps Marijois in. The idea of Marijois as a controlled environment like a greenhouse aligns with the Gorosei, referring to humans as insects. Road, pretending to be the sun god of his own enclosure, suggests that Emu is also LARPing as a sun god above the sun tree Eve in some form or another. If we go back to Enel, we can find that another facet of Emu's world is some type of special energy source. In Enel's cover story, he uses the power of his devil fruit to energize machinery and get to the moon, and later it's revealed that this same energy has some ancient significance. So this tells us that Emu probably has a connection to some ancient form of energy source that is used to power up a special technology, which is exactly what we saw with the Mother Flame and the weapon that destroyed the Leisure Kingdom. The significance here is that in the perfect world of Mu, humans aren't trusted to have access to this technology. Instead, only Emu's forces can use the special power, so again we're seeing Emu limit the capabilities of humanity. Furthermore, Emu's need for some form of ancient energy source may explain why Marijois was established above the Sun Tree Eve. One way Oda could go about this is Emu tricked the 20 allied kingdoms to move onto the Red Line to avoid the cleansing floods, when in reality it was just a ploy for Emu to set up above the Eve Tree. This trick may be something else Emu erased from history. As we touched on earlier, forgetting is another aspect of the world of Mu, so it's possible. The world government has put a lot of effort into preventing people from remembering certain things, like we said a second ago with Clover and Ohara. Now, I want to get into some quotes and specific scenes so we can illustrate these points with some evidence for what we've been talking about. For example, Sabo gives us the idea of the celestial dragon in Emu's perspective when he says, "It's not some kind of fate that decides our lives, it's us." This echoes Emu creating a perfect world to prevent fate from interfering. This hints at the celestial idea that they can control fate, but it also implies that people are the ones who can overthrow the current system. Beijing adds to the idea that anyone that has conviction can change the world when he says to Katakuri, "Everyone has an equal right to change the future." Additionally, Crocodile says, "What good are your happy ideals if you can't do anything to make them a reality?" Hinting that the world of Mu is a place of Emu's ideals. Luffy says, "If you don't take risks, you can't create a future." So this tells us that Emu created the world of Mu to eliminate the risk of something happening. So these two quotes tell us that Emu believes strength is being able to impose your will onto reality or into reality, and also that Emu's playing it safe, and because of this the future will never change. In episode 1026, Odin said, "When you're trying to protect something, it takes a lot of determination to live without compromising your belief. No matter how much time goes by, stick to what you believe in and don't let it go." So from this we can see that Emu has compromised her or his beliefs and has let go, which has led to the world of Mu. So Emu is sustaining herself in her own world of happiness, like their own dream, similar to a state of nirvana or a daydream, while the rest of the world suffers. Because of this, the world of Mu doesn't have a future, it's just sustained in its era. Shanks reinforces something similar in the quote, "By experiencing both victory and defeat, running away and shedding tears, a man will become a man. It's okay to cry, but you have to move on." So according to Shanks, Emu doesn't move on or doesn't develop or grow, which means that they are stuck in their situation. So in other words, anyone with conviction or the will to stick to their natural development can change the era, aka overthrow the world of Mu. Vegapunk confirms this in his speech. "The future is in your hands. You have the power to change it. Do not falter, do not lose hope. The dawn of a new era is upon us, and you are its herald." Also, Zeph says, "Even if armed with hundreds of weapons, there are times where you just can't beat a man with a spear of conviction in his gut." However, this isn't all that's required. You also need bonds embodied by allies. Robin says, "No matter how much you want to do things alone, no one can accomplish anything by themselves," which highlights Emu's vulnerability as an isolated monarch. Frankie also says during his Enies Lobby speech in 423, "Not one of them hesitates to take on the world for the sake of their comrades." Now, finally, there are plenty of quotes in the story that make it clear that the change in era usually involves the death of a hero in some way, as is traditional with many stories. Smoker tells us in 483, "A man's worth isn't determined by how he lives, but rather how he dies." Whether or not this refers to a physical or metaphysical death, it's clear that something's going to happen to Luffy once he does overthrow Emu's dream and replace it with his own. Finally, the whole reveal of the world of Mu might recontextualize some older quotes. Whitebeard said that someone will challenge the world before he died. Roger supposedly knew the truth of the world. Blackbeard and his crew do often talk about the world, and Van Auga specifically told Saturn that Blackbeard wants the world. Doflamingo in Impel Down hinted that when the treasure in Marijois is revealed, the world will be turned upside down. So from that, we know that Emu is the world, and it's the world of Mu. So with the Dofi quote, for example, that means that if the world knew the truth about Emu, then they'd realise that the world is upside down, because hell is at the top where they believe heaven is, and heaven is at the we believe is at the bottom, right? Where Davy Jones' locker and stuff like that is. So the world has been flipped. Also, this could add to the fact that if people knew the truth, they'd know that the new world was originally where paradise is now, and paradise was originally where the new world is, and that's also been swapped. Okay, so Emu's dream is to create her world of Mu, aka a perfect world. Emu's perfect world is multifaceted. Oda illustrates how Emu wants each facet to work through major villains in each arc, as we discussed. For example, in Modern Wano, Kaido had the country's inhabitants slaving away to make weapons, so this tells us humans act as labour and a means of destruction for Emu. A product of weapons production is pollution, which causes these same humans that are working to have the Smile disease. This tells us that Emu doesn't value the humans' welfare, but instead just their labour. We see this depicted when the inhabitants of Flevance get white lead disease, the product of the world government mining amber lead in the area. Additionally, Enel says that fear is God, so the reader can infer that Emu uses fear to enact their will on the world government's subject, so that again is another aspect of the world of Mu, fear. So again, we see the New World is pretty much dominated by mostly humans and the world government, and the New World literally has the word world in its name. So this leaves the other half of the world free, and the name Paradise foreshadows that it was how a perfect world should really be, aka lots of different races, climates, and possibilities. In the near future, I'll talk a little more about how this hemisphere specifically connects to Joy Boy and Davy. So currently the world of Mu is on the left side of the planet and the world of the Decline is on the right side of the planet. One way we can imagine this is as yin and yang. Additionally, the world that Emu has created is likely a twisted version of what came before, the same way Wapol made Black Drum Kingdom from Drum Kingdom. This also mirrors the fact that there were two sides of the royal family in Dressrosa, with Dofi and Riku. And again, Doflamingo created the birdcage to enact complete control, so we know which side Dofi relates to. That would be Emu, right? Now, the defining trait of the world government is control in the name of peace. In Emu's ideal world, everything would go exactly as Emu wanted. But in reality, from the Celestial Dragon's rule to the censorship of history, the entire system functions like a lid over a boiling pot, and eventually it's going to blow open. We've speculated before that Emu's name is the same as the ancient kingdom, so it could be that Clover was about to say Mu, and that's why he was killed. So this gives us a clue as to how to overthrow the world of Mu, which is essentially to bring the secret Mu into the light so the world can see the truth, as we mentioned before. If the world learned the truth, they'd understand that the world is flipped, etc., etc. The fact Emu is hidden leads us to wonder what Emu doesn't want people to remember about her. We mentioned earlier that Wapol left Drum to create his own vision of the kingdom there. He was the son of the King of Drum and is hinted to be involved in his death, so it could be that Emu's father was killed under suspicious circumstances and Emu went on to create a new version of the father's kingdom, or the ancient kingdom. We saw something similar with Loki and his father, Harald's death. So why did Emu do this? Well, now we know it was to make a perfect world, the world of Mu. This is what Enel was also seeking in his search for the Endless Verth, a Birkin from the destroyed nation of Birka invading Shandora and claiming it for his own. That said, we don't know where Enel got his dream from, how he knows about the Endless Verth, and how he got his devil fruit. The term Endless Verth is synonymous here for the world of Mu. It's not a real place, it's something told to these characters as a child in stories. So Emu's dream of a perfect world is the culmination of an age-old fear, which is that freedom leads to destruction. Yet One Piece insists that only through freedom, through laughter and dreams and bonds, can the world truly thrive. If Joy Boy Sim was to try wake humanity from its dream state, then it's Emu's crime that is keeping the world in its dream state forever. The word Mu itself is a spiritual reference for essentially the idea of nothingness. So Emu's world of Mu is essentially a world of nothingness, and in contrast, Luffy wants a world of joy, or a world of anything, you could say. So his devil fruit, for example, transforms anything he imagines into reality. As we've talked about before, there's a ton of other media that deals with this, from Naruto with the infinite Tsukuyomi to Game of Thrones with the Long Night. Okay, so now we have a solid understanding of what Oda was going for with the world of Mu. We've unpacked the elements that make it up. All that's left in this regard is finding out what World of D is, in contrast to Emu's perfect world. In the story, Paradise is described as chaotic through its weather conditions and the danger posed to anyone who would dare sail there. The D-Clan was said to always bring a storm, so we can see why Paradise might tie to the D-Clan. Glorious tells us that in East Blues there's a motto that says love is a hurricane, and many D-Clan members are from the East Blue, again connecting storms with the D-Clan. So if the world was flipped, then perhaps the D-Clan were originally where the New World is now, and Emu and the Ancient Kingdom were on the opposite side, where Ohara used to be, for example. Chapter 1. 1163 of One Piece finally told us, at least partly, why Emu wants to get rid of the D-Clan, saying that Mu's world cannot be perfect once they're alive. Additionally, the recent Davy reveals have stirred up another classic One Piece mystery that pretty much every reader or watcher knows about. Rockstar Sebek revealing his true name to be Davy. D. Sebek brings up questions about the meaning of the D initial once again. Some speculated the D means Davy, but the reveal of Rock's true name has subdued this idea a little, because this would mean Rock's real name is Davy Xebek. While this might seem unlikely at first, it does fit with some other naming schemes, like Tony Chopper and Hito Nomi. Both Chopper and Devil Fruit are closely tied to trees, as is Davy Jones, which we covered in our recent Davy Deep Dive, or Shwui, all of which ties into the forest god motif. There's a book series many of you are probably familiar with called A Series of Unfortunate Events. In the story, there is a 3-letter acronym for a mysterious organization at the center of the story, which is VFD. Throughout the series, the VFD acronym pops up, but is often revealed to be just an innocuous coincidence. It's not until the end we get a more definitive answer to what the acronym truly means in relation to the story. One Piece might work this same way. We have mysterious epithets like the man marked by flames and the D-Clan repeated throughout the story. There are many candidates for the man marked by flames, so perhaps the idea is that there may be more than one person known as the marked by flames. This would be similar to how Luffy, Joyboy and Nika are all separate names. Considering how many characters fit the description of man marked by flames, which has led to tons of different theories, this perhaps means the D has many different meanings too. Again, there's plenty of different theories of what the initial means, so maybe all of these are somewhat right. Maybe the D does mean dawn, which is what fans think Luffy will bring about, but also maybe it means devil, as in the enemies of the god, as we hear from quotes in the story. Maybe it also means drum, as in drums of liberation. I've spoken before about how the D is possibly Emu and Joyboy's family initials, and knowing the full word could reveal to the world who Emu truly is. This would match what we saw recently with Zebek, where he revealed his true name to Harold, changing what little we knew about him as a character. We also looked at the idea that the ancient kingdom might share this same name, and by reviving the name in people's memories, it could revive the ancient kingdom. That said, surely after 30 years of manga, we can do a pretty comprehensive deep dive to find out specifically what Odas are trying to get at. As always, we rely on quotes and symbols to get an idea, so let's look at the most important example and see what stands out. By this point, everyone and their mums have released an interpretation of the Harley myth revealed in Elbaf, but surprisingly, a lot of these interpretations seem to differ. Despite this, there's definitely one detail on the Harley myth which is crystal clear, and it wasn't particularly hidden either. The Elbaf mural explicitly tells us the meaning of the D symbol referenced in D clan members' names and the will of D. In the second part of the Harley text it says, "Those of the half moon dreamed." This means dreamers, like Luffy, are D clan members, and that these people are referred to here as those of the half moon. So, the Harley myth tells us the D is tied to the half moon as well as dreams. This means Blackbeard stands out as special as he doesn't sleep, thus doesn't dream, but still carries the D moniker. The third part of the Harley myth says, Yichul, the inconvenient remnants recall the promised day and hear the voice of the half moon. So we are being told that the survivors of Emu's purge are waiting on the voice of the D clan. Although we don't know why specifically these people are so inconvenient to Emu, we can see in chapter 1163 that Emu says that Mu's perfect world can't be complete while the D moniker survives. Those remnants waiting for the voice could be the voice of all things, implying there may be an important crossover between the voice of all things and the clan. Additionally, the shape of the D initial matches a half moon, adding to the idea that the D initial at least partly means a half moon. There is plenty of evidence for this interpretation littered in the 30 years of mana already. Moon phases were in Oda's mind from the very beginning of One Piece, going as far as adding these phases in the background throughout the entire story. We see this in both the manga itself as well as the cover pages, such as Buggy's First. A spicy example of this can be seen in the cover page that shows an Amazonian woman and a prince with a baby held in front of the moon, implying that around the time of the Void Century, an Amazonian woman, aka Lily, and a prince, aka Joyboy, had a child of the moon, aka a child with the D initial. So how do we use the half moon to uncover more about the D initial? Well, we can find Oda using the half moon phase during the drum arc in the East Blue Saga. So, an island beginning with D called Drum, as in a Drums of Liberation, is where the will of D is introduced, and a sacrifice is made by Herlock, which lives parallel with D clan member Xebek in the past. All of this falls under a half moon. This adds to the idea that the D clan and the will of D are tied to a phase of the moon's progression, but also implies the D initial also connects to the word drum. The Drums of Liberation were introduced in Wano. One Piece theorist Straw Hat Jedi does a great job of collating a load of moon lore in a couple of videos and online posts, and I've linked his channel below. Toki made a prophecy about the moon unaware of the dawn, and Wano is definitely littered in moon symbols, with most clans' suffix being Tsuki, meaning moon. The important thing here though is that the warriors of Wano used a half moon to identify as enemies of the tyrannical shogun. So in Wano, Odin tells us the half moon means those rebelling against tyranny. The moon we see associated is a waning moon, or in other words, a late stage moon. This is followed by Elbaf, which is littered in sun symbology, so you can see what Oda's doing here. We can use this to speculate that the upcoming Great War is what D clan members have been waiting for, as they are aware of the dawn and want to see it come into fruition. Evidence for this is the factions that protect Joyboy's legacy in the form of poneglyphs. Shortly before Wano we had Zu, where plenty of moon symbology was present, and we learned the mink protected a poneglyph. The Kozuki protect many poneglyphs, and they are tightly associated with the moon, as we discussed. Roger left graffiti on a poneglyph he found in Skypiea, the inhabitants of whom are thought to have descended from the moon, so alongside meaning a half moon and likely drum, the moniker also represents rebellion. During the peak of the Wano arc, Hiyori played Moon Princess on her shamisen, marking the breaking of the night into dawn, and an Orochi burns to death. As a quick aside, the mysterious lyrics of this song are still yet to be revealed. Bink Saki is another song with mentions of the sun and moon, focusing more on the moon towards the end. Black Maria's song in chapter 9, 192, refers to friends or lovers parted on a snowy night, reunited under the light of the moon. Kuina and Zoro's renowned battle featured a prominent moon in most pages. The list goes on, and during a reread elements like this seems to stick out way more, at least of me personally, and particularly around the cover pages. Before we summarise, I should quickly mention that many years ago, a user in a friend's Discord tracked every moon in every panel from chapter 1 to 1000. If anyone wants a copy of this, drop me a message in the service linked below, and I'd be happy to provide. Unfortunately, I no longer remember the username, but if you're watching, then do drop me a message. So there's a tangent about the D clan and the moon, but what's this got to do with the world of Mu? Okay, well, hopefully this next bit clears things up. So the world of Mu is one half of the blue planet, and the D clan is associated with one half of the moon. Both represent the same idea. The Harley myth told us there were people waiting for the half moon, which means it's not currently there already. So when we add this all up, it appears that the world of D is the other half of the world, but at the moment it's still being waited for. In other words, when Luffy's journey is finished, the world will be flipped. Imu's world of Mu, aka the New World, will become the Old World, and Paradise will become the New World, the world of D, or the world of Dawn and Dreams.